Did you know The Simpsons had 3 pilot episodes? Well, I suppose I'm stretching the definition of a pilot, but there are 3 first episodes of The Simpsons. There's Good Night, the first ever television appearance of the family that premiered on The Tracey Ullman Show all the way back in April 1987. There's the first episode in Season 1, which is the Christmas special called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire. And then there's Some Enchanted Evening, the finale of Season 1. Wait, what? You might be thinking, what is bro yapping about? How is the Season 1 finale meant to be the pilot of The Simpsons? Well, let me give you a little history lesson. James L. Brooks, one of the original names attached to The Simpsons, was absolutely killing it in Hollywood in 1983. By this point, he had 5 television shows, which ran over 100 episodes each. His most recent show, Taxi, had ended in 1983, getting him 9 Emmys and 2 Peabodys, bringing him to a total of 60 Emmys across all his sitcoms. By the end of Taxi, Brooks had already moved on to working on his own feature film at Paramount called Terms of Endearment, which he produced, wrote, and directed. This was also a smash success, grossing $165 million on a budget of only $8 million. On top of that, it was nominated for 11 Academy Awards, winning 5, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay. Now, an important thing to note is that in the 80s, TV was nowhere near as glamorous as it is today. TV was seen as a lesser product, and anybody in the industry wanted to work on movies if they got the chance to. At least most of the time. In 1986, Brooks formed his production company, Gracie Films, which had a focus on giving writers a vehicle to have their films made. Around the same time, the Fox Television Network was founded. The executives were seeing that major networks were getting repetitive, and a lot of viewers were switching to cable or independent networks. They went to Brooks and more or less begged him to do a show for them. The head of entertainment said to Brooks, "Is there any way I can entice you back into television? Is there any project you feel passionately about enough to do it for this startup network?" His answer was a sketch show with this woman named Tracey Ullman. So he and his team at Gracie Films got to work, but they encountered a problem. The sketches had several scenes, so it wasn't clear when one sketch had ended and another one had begun. The idea they came up with was to have animated sketches as bumpers, usually leading into and out of commercials. And this is where Matt Groening comes in. Brooks got a gift from the production designer of Terms of Endearment. It was a cartoon from Groening as a thank you for being nominated for an Academy Award. The comic was Success and Failure in Hollywood, which was a part of his Life in Hell series. Brooks liked it, so when they were searching for animated sections for the Tracey Ullman Show, he inquired about that series. However, Fox wanted merchandising rights. Groening passed, as this was his only guaranteed source of income. They went back and asked if he has any characters he wouldn't have a problem with Fox merchandising. He returned with some more characters from his strips Life in Hell and Work is Hell. But the publishers wouldn't allow TV rights for them. Once again, he was asked to draw some characters they don't have to pay publishers for. And the next day, he arrived with a piece of paper with The Simpsons. On a Google search, he would come across the idea that Groening, moments before his meeting with Brooks, had sketched The Simpsons family and showed them to him. That is probably a myth, according to my research. Anyway, we're into production on The Tracey Ullman Show, and the first ever appearance of The Simpsons hits the airwaves with Good Night, a short 1 minute and 50-second sketch about putting children to bed. But these weren't just any children, these were the first incarnation of The Simpsons. And God, this animation is janky. There's a story behind why, but we don't have time for that. The premise is, when putting Bart, Lisa, and Maggie to sleep, Marge and Homer unwittingly say something to scare each of them. When Marge and Homer finally go to bed themselves, they're pleased with how good parents they are, before the children rush into bed with them, and then finito. Here's a little interesting tidbit. It seems that the order of who gets put to bed is different depending on what version you're looking at. Sometimes it's Bart, Lisa, then Maggie, other times it's Maggie, Lisa, then Bart. According to this random commenter, the latter is the correct order, but I personally think the former works better, mostly because of how Homer sets up the premise of saying goodnight. Great. The Simpsons have been introduced to the world, and they continue trucking along, creating a total of 48 shorts. A lot of the mainstay characters would be introduced, like Grandpa Simpson, Graggle, and Krusty the Clown. Through this, The Simpsons would grow in popularity. Tracey Ullman could spend up to 3 hours in the makeup chair, which left the live studio audience very restless. But to calm them down, they would stitch together The Simpsons shorts, which usually got the biggest laughs of the entire show. Okay, let me briefly explain something. So the Fox network at the time wasn't just producing shows for their own network. Take for example MASH. This aired on CBS even though it was a Fox production. They were looking to get original programming for their network. But Fox Television and Fox Broadcasting were separate things, and they both had their own bottom lines to meet. The Simpsons were put into a tape that was around 20 minutes in length and shopped around. The hesitancy with The Simpsons was it would cost $1 million per episode to produce, and with a goal of a 13-episode run, that's a major investment. For comparison, a live-action sitcom called Family Ties cost just under $600,000 to make per episode, except this was during its 7th season. But that didn't stop The Simpsons from being shopped around, and the head at ABC at the time, Bob Iger, watched it, and within 7 minutes he said, "I'll buy it." This convinced some of the execs of Fox to give The Simpsons a shot. Now, there wasn't a unanimous opinion around the Fox execs, and some say they wanted to kill The Simpsons when it was on the Tracy Ullman Show, but nonetheless, it got put into production. This is where we get introduced to our intended pilot, Some Enchanted Evening.
Yeah, this is the show that almost killed The Simpsons.
The major issue with the first version of this episode is the animation is really rough. The original version was recovered and, oh Jesus. If you thought season 1 had bad animation, then avert your eyes.
We sat there in the dark after the episode had finished, and very quickly the room emptied out, leaving just just a few of the people responsible. And the phrase I remember hearing, and it will be forever imprinted on my brain. In the dark, Jim, you said, "This is shit." And there was silence, and one of the animators said, "What do you mean shit?" And you said, "A foul substance which causes disease." And that's when the room emptied. I think people realized it was going downhill from there.
This could have been the end of The Simpsons. If the next episode was as bad as the first, the show would have been cancelled.
But we were seeing the show that meant that the series could not possibly work. If the next week we saw a second show as seriously off as that, and we had to wait a week before that was true, but nobody was calling the Emperor, well, you couldn't call the Emperor anything else but naked at that moment.
But fortunately, when Bart the Genius came back, the second episode, they did have something to work with.
It's easy to blame, a few culprits, but the fact is, we were looking at this all the way through. We were looking at animatics, we were looking at designs, and everything like that, and it just slipped by because we didn't know. We didn't know how to look at animation. Wondering if indeed this was it. My brief career in animation was over, and it was so gratifying when we saw the animation for the episode that David Silverman directed, Bart the Genius, because it meant we saw right away, oh, this is fixable, we can make this thing work.
This ended up getting The Simpsons delayed from its initial September 1989 deadline to December, which at that point they had the Christmas special produced. The special was the first episode of The Simpsons to air, and would be their official pilot. So, what does yours truly think about that episode? Well, it's a bit quaint, isn't it? Let me recap the plot for you, just in case you can't remember the exact details of an episode from a show released in 1989. The short version is, it's Christmas. Bart ends up getting a tattoo when they go Christmas shopping, and Marge must use all the Christmas savings to get it removed. That, coupled along with the fact that Homer isn't getting his Christmas bonus, means The Simpsons won't have any presents this year, ruining Christmas. Homer goes and gets a job as a mall Santa in secret to try and make up for the lack of money. Bart decides to mess with Homer, not knowing it's him, which is when Homer admits to having no money for Christmas. Fortunately, he finishes the shift and gets his paycheck, which turns out to only be $13. That's not going to get them any presents, so it's off to the dog races to do the only thing a responsible father would do and put it all on black. Yeah, I mean Santa's little helper, who comes in dead last, of course. Just the luck of The Simpsons, eh? Bart and Homer scrounge outside to see if there's any winning tickets to no luck, but they do see the dog that lost the race, who's just been abandoned. Homer adopts him and goes home to admit that they won't have any presents this year. But they all love the dog as a Christmas present for the family, concluding our episode. Like I said, it's a little quaint. I enjoy the emotional core of the story, with Homer struggling for money and the lengths he'll go to make sure that his family have a good Christmas. It's quite interesting to see the family be kind and supportive to each other. Really, I'm just a bit culture shocked that this is the example of a flawed family that George Bush decided to rip on. God, maybe I really have been poisoned by cynicism. Nonetheless, I like this episode, but it's not without its issues. Remember last time when I talked about act structure in the Futurama pilot? Well, this has the same structure, however there's one key difference between this episode and the Futurama pilot. The teaser is ass. I skipped it in the recap, but there's a 2-minute section of a Christmas pageant at the school that Homer and Marge attend, and it doesn't serve any purpose. It didn't make me laugh and didn't have any connection to the rest of the plot. In general, this episode kinda takes a bit to get going. It feels like they didn't have enough meat to carry its entire runtime. And I know this goes without saying for the entire first season of The Simpsons, but some of the animation is just really dodgy. But the burning question I'm sure you're all asking is, how did it serve as a pilot? I'm gonna say not great. If there was any show to get away with having a pilot that falls short, it would be The Simpsons. Some had already seen it with the Tracy Ullman show, and the novelty of having animation at a primetime slot was enough to keep viewers engaged. But it doesn't do a lot of things that I expect from a pilot. Like I already mentioned, the act structure isn't as tight as it could be, but it also doesn't set up the family's roles compared to other pilots. It sets up Homer for sure, and maybe a little bit of Bart, but it treats Marge and Lisa like you already know them. Understandably so, due to this being the 8th episode produced. You do get a small bit of The Simpsons not being your ideal television family, like the trope they're trying to subvert, but it's not at an interpersonal level between the family, and it's more of an external force pushing them down. Or at least that's how I view it. I'm questioning whether what I just said is true or not, considering the culture has changed massively since this episode premiered. From my perspective in current year, this seems like external factors, but The Simpsons came out during a time where some of my age could still afford a house. I suppose Bart getting a tattoo is an example of a messy family, but their real issue is not having a high enough income. Enough rambling. Overall, good episode, kinda takes a bit to get going, and doesn't quite hit the mark for a pilot. Speaking of pilots, did you know I made one? It's a show called Midlands Mayhem, and it's playing here right behind me, and yes, I know you want me to go back to the video, but please watch the trailer! But we still have some Enchanted evening. And how does that fare as a pilot? I'd have to say pretty damn well. The Simpsons family are having breakfast. Marge feels neglected, so she calls into a therapist show on the radio to express her frustrations, which Homer overhears at work. Homer, now knowing he's in trouble, sets up a date for them to go on, meaning he'll have to find a babysitter for the kids. They find one, but it turns out to be the babysitter bandit. Someone who poses as a babysitter, but steals all the family's valuables while they have the kids tied up. Bart, Lisa, and Maggie manage to outsmart her, but when Homer gets home, he apologizes to her and frees her, not realizing who she is. The plot's a little light in this episode, but that's more than okay because it spends its runtime setting up the characters in the family. You get a much stronger sense of each of the characters' roles within the family and how their dynamic works. You also get a good idea of how the rest of the world views The Simpsons. It's also a lot more tightly paced than the Christmas special. And to be honest, I remember being terrified of this episode as a child. The episode isn't perfect though. As you heard before, they had to redo a lot of the animation from the original version, and you can still see it plaguing the visuals throughout this episode. And even some of the redone stuff isn't great. That being said, if I were to pick a pilot, it would certainly be Some Enchanted Evening. Goodnight is a cute little introduction, but a 2-minute short isn't enough to set up a television show. Then we have the Christmas special, which I enjoy the emotional core of, but doesn't fulfill at least some of the things I outlined when I was talking about the Futurama pilot. Obviously, why would it though? It was never intended to be the pilot. This leaves us with Some Enchanted Evening, which adequately introduces the characters and the world of The Simpsons. It serves as a good starting point for viewers in 1989, and while it's not exceptional, it's one of the episodes that proved the animated family could work on primetime. Just remember, this wasn't the actual pilot, but in my ideal world, it would have been. Despite the rocky start, The Simpsons had one of the most successful runs of any television show ever. I think it's inspiring that they had to go through all this trouble and hardship, and they were able to make it work. So, what's stopping you?